The cold October rain hammered against the windshield as I leaned forward in the passenger seat of the ambulance, squinting through the sheets of water that turned the bridge ahead into nothing more than a blur of red taillights and flashing hazards. My partner Jake was driving, his knuckles white on the steering wheel as he navigated through the Friday evening traffic that had ground to a complete standstill on the Tappan Zee Bridge. The radio crackled with dispatch updates, confirming what we could already see: multiple vehicle accident ahead with reports of a car in the water. My stomach tightened the way it always did before we arrived at a scene. After 7 years as a paramedic, you'd think I'd be used to the adrenaline spike. But some part of me remained perpetually nervous, perpetually aware that every call could go sideways in an instant. I reached back to check our equipment one more time, my fingers running over the familiar shapes of the trauma kit, the oxygen tanks, the spinal board. Everything exactly where it should be, exactly where it always was. Routine gave me comfort, structure in the chaos. Jake finally maneuvered the ambulance onto the shoulder, pushing past the stalled cars until we could see the scene clearly. 3 vehicles were involved. One sedan crumpled against the concrete barrier. Another SUV spun sideways across 2 lanes. But it was the empty space in the guardrail that drew my attention. The twisted metal bent outward like torn paper. And beyond it, the dark water of the Hudson River. State troopers were already on scene, their cruisers forming a perimeter. Emergency lights painting the rain-soaked pavement in alternating red and blue. One of them, a young officer whose name tag read Martinez, jogged up to us as we climbed out of the ambulance. The wind immediately cut through my uniform, carrying the smell of gasoline and burnt rubber. He was shouting over the storm, pointing toward the water. Black Mercedes sedan went through about 5 minutes ago. Witnesses say they saw muzzle flashes before impact. Looked like a drive-by that went wrong. Driver might still be in the vehicle. Without thinking, I was already moving toward the broken guardrail, my training overriding the voice in my head that was screaming about how cold that water would be, how dangerous, how insane. Jake grabbed my arm, his face tight with concern. "Nicole, wait for the dive team. They're 15 minutes out." I shook my head, already stripping off my heavy-duty belt with its radio and equipment pouches. If someone's trapped in a sinking car, 15 minutes is 14 minutes too long. You know the protocol. Before he could argue further, I kicked off my boots and dove through the gap in the railing. The water was a shock to my system, so cold it felt like 1,000 needles driving into my skin all at once. For a moment I couldn't breathe, couldn't think, could only feel the brutal temperature that made every muscle seize up in protest. Then my training kicked in, my body remembering what my mind couldn't process through the shock. I surfaced, gasping, and immediately began scanning the dark water. The rain created a curtain of noise all around me, the river churning with wind-driven waves that kept trying to push me under. There, about 30 feet downstream, I could make out the dark shape of the vehicle, nose down in the water at an angle, the trunk still visible above the surface. Already it was sinking deeper, the river claiming it inch by inch. I swam toward it, fighting against the current that wanted to sweep me past, my arms cutting through the water with determined strokes. Every breath was a battle against the cold that was already trying to shut down my body, but I kept moving. Had to keep moving. The rear window was intact, but when I reached the driver's side door, I found it partially open, either from the impact or from the driver's attempt to escape. Through the murky water, I could see a figure slumped over the steering wheel, unmoving. I dove under, pulling myself through the open door into the vehicle's interior. The water pressure made everything harder, my movements sluggish as I fought to unhook the driver's seatbelt. He was a big man, broad-shouldered and solidly built, wearing what looked like an expensive suit now soaked through and heavy with water. Blood clouded the water around his head, coming from a wound at his temple. I finally got the seatbelt released and hooked my arms under his, pulling him back toward the door. My lungs were burning, screaming for air, but I couldn't surface without him. The car shifted suddenly, tilting further nose down, and I felt it start to drop deeper. Now or never. With the last of my strength, I pushed off from the car door and dragged the unconscious man upward. We broke the surface together, and I gasped in air that felt like fire in my frozen lungs. The man's head lolled against my shoulder, completely limp, not breathing. No. Not after coming this far. I started swimming back toward the bridge, keeping his face above water, fighting against exhaustion that was threatening to pull us both under. My muscles were cramping from the cold, my movements becoming more uncoordinated with each stroke. Voices were shouting from the bridge, officers and emergency responders calling out instructions. But I couldn't focus on their words. All I could do was keep swimming, keep the man's airways clear, keep us both alive. Hands reached down to grab us as I finally made it to the rocky bank beneath the bridge, multiple officers helping to haul us out of the water. Someone threw a thermal blanket around me, but I shook it off immediately, dropping to my knees beside the man I'd pulled from the river. He wasn't breathing, his lips blue-tinged in the emergency lights. I tilted his head back, checked his airway, and began CPR without hesitation. 30 compressions, hard and fast, feeling ribs flex beneath my interlocked hands. Then 2 rescue breaths, watching for his chest to rise. Nothing. Again. 30 compressions. The rhythm automatic now, something I'd practiced so many times it was pure muscle memory. 2 breaths. Come on, breathe. Someone moved beside me with our equipment, Jake preparing to intubate. But before he could, the man suddenly convulsed beneath my hands. Water erupted from his mouth as his body fought to expel the river he'd swallowed. I quickly turned him on his side, supporting his head as he coughed and choked, his chest heaving with the effort to breathe. His eyes opened, unfocused and glazed with pain and confusion. Those eyes. Even through the rain and the emergency lights and the shock of what had just happened, something about his face struck me as familiar. But that was impossible. I'd never met this man before. He tried to speak, his hand reaching up to grab my arm with surprising strength for someone who'd just nearly drowned. His lips moved, forming words I had to lean close to hear over the storm. No police. His voice was barely a rasp, raw from the water he'd inhaled. Please. No police. I pulled back, confused. Officer Martinez was already approaching with his radio, calling for additional units and beginning to process the scene. The man's grip on my arm tightened, his eyes now focused on mine with an intensity that sent a chill through me that had nothing to do with the cold water. They'll kill me. His voice was stronger now, urgent. The police report will be public. They'll know I survived. Please. Before I could respond, before I could even process what he was asking, Jake was there with the gurney and we were loading the man onto it, securing him for transport. My mind was spinning, exhaustion and adrenaline making it hard to think clearly. We got him into the ambulance, and I began my assessment routine automatically. Head trauma, possible gunshot wound to the shoulder based on the blood pattern, signs of water aspiration in the lungs. I cut away his soaked shirt to check for other injuries, and found what I was looking for. A bullet wound in his right shoulder, the entry point small and clean. The exit wound in his back was more ragged, but it looked like the bullet had passed through without hitting anything immediately vital. As I worked, cleaning and dressing the wound, I became aware of other details. The expensive watch on his wrist, even waterlogged, was clearly worth more than I made in several months. The suit, now ruined, bore a label I recognized from window shopping in Manhattan, custom-tailored and prohibitively expensive. This was not a man who should have been driving himself across a bridge in a rainstorm. Men like this had drivers, security, people to insulate them from the world. "Who are you?" I asked quietly, as I checked his pupils with my pen light. Both responsive, that was good. He closed his eyes, exhaustion or pain making his face tight. "Nathan. Just call me Nathan." Jake climbed into the back of the ambulance, ready to head to the hospital. "I need to radio ahead with patient info," he said. "Name, age, next of kin." I saw Nathan's eyes snap open, that same desperate intensity from before. He tried to sit up despite my hand on his chest keeping him down. "I told you, no police, no hospital. They'll kill me and probably you too for saving me." His words sent ice through my veins. Jake was looking at me, confused, waiting for instructions. Every protocol I'd ever learned, every rule I'd followed in my 7 years of service, told me to take this man to the hospital immediately, to let the proper authorities handle whatever situation he was involved in. But something in his eyes, something in the way he looked at me like I was his only hope, made me hesitate. The radio crackled, dispatch asking for our status and ETA. Jake reached for it, but Nathan's hand shot out, grabbing Jake's wrist. His voice was stronger now, carrying an undercurrent of command that made both of us freeze. "Your partner can drop me anywhere. A gas station, a convenience store, anywhere. I'll pay you both $10,000 cash right now to forget this ever happened." Jake's eyes widened, looking from Nathan to me and back again. "Nicole, this is insane," he started, but I was already shaking my head. Not because I didn't think it was insane, it absolutely was, but because something deeper than logic was telling me that this man was genuinely in danger, that whatever he was involved in was bigger and more dangerous than a simple traffic accident. "We can't just dump a patient," I said, trying to maintain some professional distance even as my heart was racing. "You've been shot, you nearly drowned, you need proper medical care." "I'm a trained combat medic," Nathan replied, his voice carrying absolute certainty. "I can tell you exactly what I need. Antibiotics, surgical sutures, IV fluids, pain management." The bullet went clean through, no major vessels compromised, no bone fragments. I've had worse injuries that I treated myself. The clinical way he assessed his own trauma was somehow more frightening than anything else he'd said. This was a man accustomed to violence, to being hurt, to surviving in situations where hospitals and police weren't options. Jake was already shaking his head, reaching for his radio again. "I'm calling this in, Nicole. This is way above our pay grade. We have a GSW patient, we have to report it. In New York, any gunshot wound had to be reported to law enforcement. It wasn't even a question." But as Jake lifted the radio to his mouth, Nathan moved with a speed that seemed impossible for someone in his condition. His hand intercepted Jake's wrist again, and this time there was steel in his grip, in his voice. "You call that in, and you sign both your death warrants. The Valdez cartel doesn't leave witnesses. They killed my driver, they tried to kill me, and they will kill anyone who can place me at this scene." The name Valdez hit me like a physical blow. Even someone like me, someone who didn't follow organized crime news, had heard about the Valdez cartel. They'd been all over the news for months, a brutal organization out of Mexico that was expanding into New York territory, leaving a trail of violence in their wake. If this man was involved with them, if he was their target, then everything he was saying suddenly made terrible, frightening sense. Jake's face had gone pale, the radio forgotten in his hand. "The cartel?" he whispered. "You're saying the cartel is after you?" Nathan's laugh was bitter, painful. "Not just after me. They hit me on a public bridge in rush hour traffic. They're sending a message, making a statement. They don't care about collateral damage or witnesses. In fact, they prefer witnesses. It spreads the fear." His eyes found mine again, and I saw in them something I recognized from my own experiences in high-stress situations. A desperate calculation, weighing odds, assessing options, fighting for survival. "Help me," he said simply. "Just until I can make contact with my people. 24 hours, maybe less. I'll make it worth your while, and I'll make sure you're protected." Every instinct I had for self-preservation was screaming at me to refuse, to do my job, to let the system handle this. But another instinct, The one that had made me dive into freezing water without hesitation. The one that had kept me in this profession despite the trauma and exhaustion and terrible pay. That instinct was telling me something different. This man would die if I didn't help him. Maybe I would die too, but I'd pulled him from that river for a reason. I couldn't just throw him back in a different kind of danger. Before I could talk myself out of it, I heard my own voice saying words that would change everything. My apartment. It's in Queens. Small. No doorman. No security cameras in the building. You can recover there tonight. Jake stared at me like I'd lost my mind. Nicole, what the hell are you doing? I honestly didn't know. Maybe it was shock from the cold water. Maybe it was exhaustion from a double shift that should have ended an hour ago. Maybe it was something else entirely. Something I couldn't name. But looking at Nathan's face, seeing the relief and gratitude and something else, something that looked almost like recognition, I knew I'd already made my choice. We drove in tense silence to my building, taking side streets, avoiding main roads where traffic cameras might capture our route. Nathan had slipped into a fitful unconsciousness, his breathing steady but shallow. I kept my hand on his wrist, monitoring his pulse, watching for signs of shock or internal bleeding. Jake helped me get him up to my third-floor walk-up, supporting him between us as he struggled to remain conscious enough to climb the stairs. My apartment was exactly as I'd left it that morning, small and cluttered and completely unprepared for a bleeding stranger. We laid Nathan on my couch, and I immediately began pulling out what medical supplies I had on hand. My personal first aid kit was extensive, more than most people kept at home, but nowhere near enough for what I needed to do. Jake stood in my tiny kitchen, his phone in his hand, his face a mask of conflict. I should call this in, Nicole. I should call my supervisor, the police, someone. I know, I said quietly, not looking up from where I was cutting away the rest of Nathan's clothes to properly assess all his injuries. But you won't. He was quiet for a long moment. Then, why did you really pull him out of that river? You hesitated before you dove. You never hesitate. I had hesitated. For maybe 3 seconds, I'd stood at that broken guardrail, looking at the dark water, thinking about all the reasons not to jump. But then I jumped anyway. The same way I was jumping now into something that could destroy my career, and possibly my life. Because it was the right thing to do, I said finally. It was the only answer I had, the only truth that made sense of any of this. Jake nodded slowly, then pocketed his phone. 24 hours, he said. After that, I'm calling it in. Nathan or no Nathan, cartel or no cartel. I can't be part of this longer than that. 24 hours, I agreed, even though I had no idea if that would be enough time, enough anything. Jake left, and I was alone with the unconscious stranger on my couch. This man named Nathan, who'd brought danger and secrets and blood into my small, carefully controlled life. I cleaned and sutured his shoulder wound, started an IV with fluids I'd borrowed from our ambulance stock, and monitored his vitals through the night. As dawn broke over Queens, painting my apartment in shades of gray and gold, Nathan finally opened his eyes. He looked at me for a long moment, really looked at me, and I saw recognition dawn in his expression. I know you, he said, his voice rough, from before, years ago. And in that moment, as sunlight illuminated his face, I realized why those eyes had seemed familiar. I did know him, or I had known him once, in what felt like another lifetime. Before everything had fallen apart, before I'd become just another paramedic struggling to pay rent in Queens. The man I'd saved from the river wasn't just some random casualty of a cartel hit. He was Nathan Cross, the boy I'd known briefly in college before he disappeared into a world I'd never understood, a world that had now come crashing back into mine with the force of a car, plunging through a guardrail into dark water. The recognition in Nathan's eyes made my hands shake as I checked his IV line, adjusting the drip rate to give myself something to focus on besides the uncomfortable weight of shared history. We'd known each other for maybe 3 months during my sophomore year at Columbia, before he dropped out suddenly, leaving behind rumors and unanswered questions. He'd been charismatic even then, drawing people to him with an easy confidence that seemed at odds with his working-class background. We'd been in the same biology study group, and I'd harbored a quiet crush that never went anywhere, because girls like me didn't end up with boys like him, boys who seemed destined for something bigger, something I couldn't quite define. That was 8 years ago. The Nathan Cross I'd known had been lean and hungry, all sharp angles and burning ambition. The man on my couch was different, broader through the shoulders, harder somehow, like life had taken a hammer to him and forged something dangerous from the raw material. His expensive suit, even ruined by the river, told a story of success. But the bullet wound and the fear in his eyes when he'd begged me not to call the police told a different story entirely, one I wasn't sure I wanted to hear. "You remember," he said, and it wasn't a question. His voice was stronger now, the IV fluids and rest bringing some color back to his face. "Nicole Parker. You were pre-med, planning to become a doctor. You had this way of explaining complex concepts that made everything seem simple. I was surprised you even noticed me in that study group." I turned away, busying myself with folding the blood-stained towels I'd used during the night. "I noticed. Everyone noticed you, Nathan. You had this intensity, like you were running from something or toward something. We never figured out which. I was running from my past and toward a future I thought I could control," he said quietly. "Turns out I was wrong about the control part." His hand moved to his shoulder, testing the dressing I'd applied. "You do good work. Better than some combat medics I've known. Where did you learn to suture like that?" "My plan to become a doctor didn't exactly work out," I said, finally meeting his eyes. "Turns out medical school requires money I didn't have and grades I couldn't maintain while working 3 jobs. So I became a paramedic instead. Still get to save lives, just with more debt and less prestige." Something flickered in his expression, something that might have been regret or sympathy. I wanted to tell him I didn't need either, that I'd made peace with how my life had turned out. But that would have been a lie. The truth was messier, full of resentment and disappointment I'd learned to bury under the daily grind of work and survival. Before either of us could say anything more, my phone buzzed on the kitchen counter. I picked it up and felt my stomach drop. 5 missed calls from Jake, 3 from my supervisor at the ambulance company, and 2 text messages from a number I didn't recognize. The first text made my blood run cold. "We know what you did last night." The second was worse. "We're watching." My hands were shaking as I showed the phone to Nathan. His face went hard, all the warmth draining from his expression. He pushed himself up to sitting despite my protest, his jaw tight with pain and something else. Anger, maybe, or determination. "How did they find out so fast?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. There were dozens of people at that scene. Officers, firefighters, witnesses. Any one of them could have talked. Nathan shook his head. "The Valdez Cartel has people everywhere. Police, emergency services, city government. They knew I was pulled from that river probably before I woke up in your ambulance." His eyes met mine, and I saw genuine fear there. Not for himself, but for me. "I've put you in danger. I should leave, find another way to contact my people." "You can barely stand," I pointed out, even as part of me wanted him to leave, wanted this nightmare to be over. "And if they're already watching, you leaving won't make me any safer. It might make it worse. You're a witness now. You saved me, which means you're either an asset or a liability to them." The words hung between us, heavy with implication. In the space of 12 hours, I'd gone from anonymous paramedic to someone marked by one of the most dangerous criminal organizations in North America. The absurdity of it would have been laughable if I wasn't so terrified. My phone buzzed again. Another message from the unknown number. This time it was a photo, and my knees went weak when I saw it. It was me, taken from across the street, walking into my building last night with Nathan leaning on me for support. Jake was visible in the frame too, his face turned toward the camera as if he'd sensed being watched. "They know where you live," Nathan said unnecessarily. "They know who helped me. The question is why they haven't acted yet." "Maybe they're waiting," I said, my mind racing through possibilities, none of them good. "Waiting to see if you contact anyone, if backup arrives, using me as bait." Nathan nodded slowly, respect flickering in his expression. "Smart. That's exactly what they're doing, which means we have a narrow window to act before they decide you're more useful dead than alive." The casual way he discussed my potential murder made me want to scream, but I forced myself to stay calm, to think like I did during emergencies. Panic killed people. Action saved them. "What do we do?" I asked. Nathan pulled himself fully upright, testing his mobility. The pain was obvious in the tightness around his eyes, but he moved with purpose, like someone accustomed to functioning through injury. "First, we assume they have eyes on the building. They'll be watching the exits, monitoring traffic in and out. We need to contact my security team without tipping off the watchers." He looked around my small apartment, his gaze calculating. "Do you have a laptop? Something not connected to your phone or regular internet?" I shook my head. "Just my phone and a tablet. Both are probably compromised if they're monitoring you." Nathan's expression darkened. "Then we need to be creative. Do you trust anyone in this building? Anyone who might help without asking too many questions?" I thought about my neighbors. Mrs. Chen in 3B, who I occasionally helped carry groceries. Marcus in 2A, who was always asking me out and getting gently rejected. The young couple in 3D, who I barely knew by sight. None of them deserved to be pulled into this. "There's no one," I said finally. "I keep to myself. Work, home, sleep, repeat. It's safer that way." "Safer," Nathan repeated, something sad in his tone. "Is that really how you've been living? Since we knew each other, since you gave up on medical school, you just withdrew from everything?" The accusation in his words stung, because it was true. After my dreams of becoming a doctor had collapsed under the weight of debt and exhaustion, I'd built walls around myself, keeping people at a distance, maintaining only the shallowest of connections. It was easier that way, less painful when things inevitably fell apart. "We don't have time for therapy sessions," I snapped, anger rising to cover my discomfort. "You need to tell me how we get out of this." Before he could answer, someone knocked on my door. 3 sharp raps that seemed impossibly loud in the tense silence of my apartment. Nathan was on his feet instantly, moving with a speed that shouldn't have been possible given his injuries. He pressed himself against the wall beside the door, reaching down to pull a knife from his boot. I hadn't even realized he was armed. His other hand motioned for me to look through the peephole. My heart hammering, I moved to the door and peered through the small lens. It was Jake, his face pale and drawn, looking up and down the hallway nervously. I recognized the body language of someone who knew they were being watched. I opened the door, and he pushed inside quickly, closing it behind him with more force than necessary. "We have a problem," he said without preamble. Multiple problems, actually. First, our supervisor called me in for questioning about last night. Someone reported that we diverted from protocol, that there were discrepancies in our incident report. Second, there's a black SUV parked across from your building. Been there since dawn with 2 men inside who haven't moved. Nathan lowered the knife but didn't put it away. "Did anyone follow you here?" Jake shook his head. "I took 3 different subway lines and walked the last mile. I'm not an idiot." But his face suggested he felt like one for getting involved in this situation at all. Nathan studied Jake for a long moment, then seemed to come to a decision. I need you to make a phone call for me. Use a burner phone, something they can't trace back to you. There's a bodega 2 blocks from here that sells them. The number I need you to call belongs to my head of security. Tell him exactly where I am and that the Valdez cartel has the location compromised. What makes you think your security team can help? I asked. If the cartel is as connected as you say, won't your people be under surveillance too? Nathan's smile was cold, utterly without humor. My people are very good at what they do. Once they know where I am, they'll extract me within hours. The problem is getting the message to them without the cartel intercepting it. That's where Jake comes in. An uninvolved third party using an untraceable phone is our best option. Jake looked at me, clearly hoping I'd tell him this was insane, that we should just call the police and trust the system to protect us. But I'd seen the texts, the photo. The system was compromised. Whatever Nathan was involved in, it operated at a level where normal rules didn't apply. Do it, I said to Jake. But be careful. If anything feels wrong, if you think you're being followed, abort and get somewhere public. Jake nodded, his jaw tight with tension. After this, we're done, Nicole. I'm going to tell our supervisor I had a family emergency and took personal days. I'm going to disappear for a week until this blows over. You should do the same. He was right, of course. The smart thing would be to run, to put as much distance between myself and this situation as possible. But something kept me rooted in place, some stubborn part of me that had jumped into freezing water without hesitation, that couldn't abandon someone who needed help even when helping might get me killed. After Jake left, the apartment felt smaller, the walls closing in with the weight of danger pressing from all sides. Nathan moved to the window, careful to stay out of direct line of sight, and peered down at the street through a gap in the curtains. Black SUV, just like Jake said. 2 occupants, probably armed, definitely communicating with someone. They're not even trying to be subtle. That's the point, I said, understanding dawning. They want you to know they're there, want you to feel trapped, make a mistake. Nathan glanced back at me, something like approval in his expression. You understand how this works. Fear is a weapon, sometimes more effective than bullets. The hours that followed were some of the longest of my life. We couldn't leave, couldn't make calls, couldn't do anything but wait and hope that Jake successfully contacted Nathan's people. I tried to keep busy, checking Nathan's vitals every hour, changing his dressing, making sure infection wasn't setting in. He tolerated my ministrations with patience, answering my clinical questions about pain levels and mobility, but offering nothing about who he really was, what he really did, how a boy from a Columbia study group had ended up with a bullet in his shoulder and a cartel hunting him. It wasn't until late afternoon, the autumn sun painting long shadows across my living room, that Nathan finally spoke about something other than immediate survival. You asked earlier what I've been doing since we knew each other, he said quietly. I've been building an empire, not the legal kind, obviously. The kind that operates in shadows, that deals with problems the legitimate world pretends don't exist. I didn't plan it this way. I thought I could go straight, finish school, become someone respectable. But life had other plans. What kind of empire? I asked, even though I wasn't sure I wanted to know. Nathan's smile was bitter, the kind that makes me a target for organizations like the Valdez Cartel. I control territory they want, business they covet. The hit last night wasn't random. It was the opening move in a war I'd been trying to avoid. My silence spoke volumes. He'd confirmed what I'd already guessed, that he was involved in organized crime, that the danger surrounding us wasn't going to disappear when his security team arrived. If anything, it might get worse. The sound of vehicles outside made us both freeze. Multiple engines, heavy doors slamming, the distinctive chirp of radios. Nathan moved to the window again, and I saw his entire body tense, 4 more SUVs, he reported. Black, heavily tinted windows. They're surrounding the building. His hand went to the knife at his boot, a gesture I realized was more comfort than practical preparation. We're outnumbered and outgunned. If they decide to breach this apartment, there's nothing we can do to stop them. Terror flooded through me, cold and paralyzing. This was really happening. Armed men were surrounding my building, preparing to do God knows what. And I was trapped in my tiny apartment with a wounded crime boss and no way out. Then we heard it, the sound of footsteps in the hallway, multiple people moving with purpose. They stopped outside my door. My breath caught in my throat as I waited for the crash of boots kicking in the door, for gunfire and violence and the end of everything. Instead, there was a knock. Polite, almost gentle. Nathan's face showed confusion, then recognition, then something that might have been relief. He moved to the door and looked through the peephole, his posture relaxing fractionally. "It's okay," he said. "They're mine." He opened the door and 4 men entered, all dressed in dark tactical gear, moving with military precision as they swept the apartment and secured the space. The last man through was older, maybe 50, with graying hair and the weathered face of someone who'd seen too much violence. His eyes found Nathan, and a tight smile crossed his features. "Glad you're alive, boss," he said in a voice roughened by years of cigarettes. "We picked up chatter about the bridge incident this morning, but couldn't confirm until your friend called." He glanced at me, his gaze assessing and not entirely friendly. "This her?" Nathan nodded. "Nicole Parker. She pulled me from the river, patched me up, kept me alive when the cartel was hunting me. She's under my protection now, Marcus. Make sure your team understands that." Marcus's expression didn't change, but I felt the weight of his attention shift, becoming more focused. "Understood. We've secured the perimeter and neutralized the Valdez surveillance team. 3 hostiles, all contained." His casual mention of neutralized made my stomach turn, but I forced myself not to react. "We need to move now, though. More cartel assets are en route. ETA 15 minutes. Nathan turned to me, and I saw conflict in his eyes. "Come with us. My people will keep you safe until we resolve this situation with the Valdez cartel. If you stay here, you're dead. They won't risk leaving a witness." Everything in me wanted to refuse, to cling to the illusion that my normal life could somehow continue, that I could wake up tomorrow and go back to work and pretend none of this had happened. But I wasn't that naive. The moment I'd pulled Nathan from that river, the moment I'd brought him to my apartment instead of a hospital, I'd crossed a line. There was no going back. I looked around my small apartment one last time, at the life I'd built from the ruins of my dreams. It wasn't much, but it had been mine, safe and predictable, and comfortable in its limitations. Now even that was being stripped away. "Okay," I said simply. "I'll come with you." Nathan's relief was visible, and something else passed across his face, something I couldn't quite read. His men moved efficiently, gathering what few essentials I had, securing Nathan in body armor despite his protests that his wound made it difficult. Within 5 minutes we were moving, surrounded by armed men who'd transformed my quiet building into a tactical operation zone. Mrs. Chen's door was cracked open as we passed, her frightened eyes peering out at the parade of armed men. I wanted to apologize, to explain, but what could I possibly say? The SUVs were waiting, engines running. I was ushered into the back of the lead vehicle with Nathan, Marcus taking the front passenger seat, another guard driving. As we pulled away from my building, I watched it recede in the side mirror, already feeling like it belonged to someone else's life, someone who'd existed before a car went into a river and changed everything. "Where are we going?" I asked. "Nathan's estate," Marcus answered from the front. 40 minutes north, full security, completely off-grid. The cartel won't be able to touch you there." The casual confidence in his voice should have been reassuring, but all I could think about was how my entire life had just been packed into a duffel bag, how I was driving toward a future I couldn't begin to imagine with a man I barely knew, but had somehow trusted enough to risk everything for. Nathan's hand found mine in the space between us, his grip warm and solid. "I won't let anything happen to you," he said quietly. "I promise." I wanted to believe him, wanted to trust that this nightmare would have a happy ending. But as we drove through the gathering darkness, leaving behind the only life I'd known, all I could feel was the vertigo of free fall, of jumping into dark water without knowing what waited below. Nathan's estate was nothing like I'd imagined. The 40-minute drive north took us through increasingly rural terrain, past gated communities and horse farms, until we finally turned onto a private road marked only by a small stone pillar with a brass number plate. The road wound through dense forest for nearly a mile before opening onto a sprawling property that looked more like a fortified compound than a home. High stone walls surrounded the main house, a modern architectural masterpiece of glass and steel that somehow managed to blend into the natural landscape. Security cameras were visible at regular intervals, and I counted at least 6 guards patrolling the perimeter as we drove through the main gate. The SUV pulled up to the front entrance where a woman in her 50s waited, her gray hair pulled back in a severe bun, her expression professionally neutral. She opened my door before I could reach for the handle, offering me a hand to help me out. "Miss Parker, I'm Catherine, Mr. Cross's house manager. I'll show you to your room and help you get settled." Her tone was polite but distant, the warmth of her words not quite reaching her eyes. I wondered how many other women Nathan had brought here under similar circumstances, whether this was a routine Catherine had performed before. Nathan was already being helped from the vehicle by Marcus and another guard, his face tight with pain from the jostling of the drive. He caught my eye and gave me a small nod, something reassuring in the gesture, before Catherine was guiding me into the house. The interior was just as impressive as the exterior, all clean lines and expensive materials. Art that I suspected was original, hanging on walls, that probably cost more than my apartment building. Everything was perfectly curated, perfectly placed, the home of someone who controlled every aspect of their environment down to the smallest detail. "Your room is on the 2nd floor," Catherine said, as we climbed a wide staircase with a glass balustrade. "Mr. Cross thought you'd appreciate the east-facing windows for morning light. There's an ensuite bathroom fully stocked with toiletries, and I've arranged for some clothes to be brought up in your size." She opened a door onto a bedroom that was larger than my entire apartment, decorated in soft grays and whites, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the forest. A king-sized bed dominated one wall, and through an open door, I could see a marble bathroom that looked like something from a luxury hotel. "This is too much," I said, feeling overwhelmed by the opulence. "I don't need all this." Catherine's expression softened slightly. "Mr. Cross is very particular about his guests' comfort. Please make yourself at home. Dinner will be served at 7 in the main dining room, but if you'd prefer to eat in your room, I can arrange that." She paused at the door, her hand on the knob. "He cares about you, you know. I've worked for Nathan Cross for 8 years, and I've never seen him bring someone here like this. Whatever happened between you two, it matters to him." Before I could process that statement or respond to it, she was gone, closing the door quietly behind her. I stood in the center of the enormous room, suddenly exhausted from the adrenaline crash following the day's events. My body was finally registering the physical trauma of diving into freezing water, the hours of tension, the terror of armed men surrounding my building. I made it to the bathroom and turned on the shower, letting the water heat to almost scalding before stepping under the spray. The expensive toiletries smelled of lavender and sandalwood, and I used them mechanically, washing away the river water and fear and blood that had clung to me like a second skin. When I finally emerged, wrapped in a towel that was somehow both impossibly soft and perfectly warm, I found that Catherine had been true to her word. Several outfits were laid out on the bed, all in my size, all in styles I would have chosen for myself if I'd had unlimited money. Jeans that actually fit, soft sweaters in muted colors, even undergarments that were practical rather than provocative. Someone had been paying very close attention to details about me, and I wasn't sure if that was comforting or terrifying. I dressed in jeans and a cream-colored sweater, then spent the next hour exploring the room, looking for hidden cameras or microphones, some evidence that my privacy was an illusion. I found nothing, but that didn't mean I wasn't being watched. At precisely 7, there was a soft knock at my door. I opened it to find Marcus standing in the hallway, his tactical gear replaced by dark slacks and a button-down shirt that did nothing to hide the gun holstered at his hip. "Mr. Cross requests your company for dinner," he said formally, "if you're feeling up to it." The phrasing suggested I had a choice, but his body language made it clear this was more command than invitation. I followed him downstairs to a dining room that could have seated 20, but was set for just 2, intimate despite the grand space. Nathan was already there, standing by the windows that overlooked a garden lit by subtle landscaping lights. He'd showered and changed as well, wearing casual clothes that still managed to look expensive, his wounded shoulder supported by a sling that Catherine must have insisted on. He turned as I entered, and I saw relief flash across his features. "You came," he said simply. "I wasn't sure you would." "Did I have a choice?" I asked, more sharply than I'd intended. The events of the day had left me raw, my usual professional composure stripped away. Nathan had the grace to look uncomfortable. "You always have a choice, Nicole. You're not a prisoner here. If you want to leave, Marcus will drive you anywhere you want to go. But he and I both know that leaving means dying. The Valdez cartel doesn't forget witnesses. So I'm trapped here," I said, moving to the table and sitting down with more force than necessary. Trapped in a gilded cage with a man I barely know, surrounded by armed guards, my entire life destroyed in the span of 24 hours. Forgive me if I'm not feeling particularly grateful for the 5-star accommodations. Nathan sat across from me, his expression pained, and I couldn't tell if it was from his physical injury or something else. "I know this isn't fair to you. I know you didn't ask for any of this, but I need you to understand something about the situation we're in." Catherine appeared with the first course, a soup that smelled amazing despite my complete lack of appetite. She served us in silence and disappeared, giving us privacy that felt both welcome and isolating. Nathan waited until we were alone again before continuing. "The Valdez cartel has been trying to expand into my territory for 2 years. They've made offers, threats, demonstrations of power. The hit on the bridge was their most aggressive move yet, and the fact that I survived makes me look either incredibly lucky or incredibly protected. Either way, it changes the dynamic of our conflict." "What does that have to do with me?" I asked, though I was beginning to understand. "You saved my life in front of dozens of witnesses. Police, firefighters, civilians with cell phones. By now, there's probably footage of you pulling me from the water circulating on social media. The cartel knows your face, your name, where you live, where you work. They know that you matter to me, which makes you valuable." "Valuable as leverage," I said, the food turning to ash in my mouth. "Valuable as a target." Nathan nodded slowly. "I have enemies beyond the Valdez cartel. Business rivals, former associates with grudges, law enforcement agencies that would love to use you to get to me. The moment you jumped into that river, you became entangled in a world you don't understand, with rules that don't make sense to someone like you." "Someone like me," I repeated. "You mean someone normal? Someone who actually tries to follow the law?" His smile was sad. "Someone good. Someone who became a paramedic because they want to help people, who works double shifts and lives in a tiny apartment, and somehow maintains their humanity, despite everything the world throws at them. Yes, someone like that." The compliment felt barbed, a reminder of everything I'd lost, everything I'd given up on. I pushed my soup away, appetite completely gone. "You didn't bring me here just to keep me safe, did you? There's something else you want from me." Nathan's hesitation was answer enough, but he finally spoke, his words careful and measured. "I need to know what you remember about when we knew each other before. About the last time we saw each other, specifically." The question caught me off guard, pulling me back to a memory I'd buried for 8 years. It had been late November, just before Thanksgiving break. Nathan had missed our study group for 2 weeks, and I'd finally worked up the courage to go to his dorm room to check on him. What I'd found had changed everything. He'd been packing, throwing clothes and books into duffel bags with frantic energy, his face bruised, his hands scraped and bloody. When I'd asked what happened, he'd told me to leave, to forget I'd ever known him. There had been fear in his eyes, real terror, and it had frightened me enough that I'd actually listened. "I remember you were running from something," I said slowly. "You were hurt, scared. You told me to stay away from you, that knowing you was dangerous. I assumed you'd gotten involved with the wrong people. Drugs maybe, or gambling. I never saw you again after that night." Nathan's jaw tightened. "Did I tell you anything specific? Names, places, anything about who I was running from?" I shook my head. "You barely said anything at all. Just kept packing and telling me to leave." "Why does it matter after all this time?" "Because that night is connected to what's happening now," he said. "The people I was running from back then are the same organization I've been fighting for the last 8 years. And if they knew that you saw me that night, that you might have information about where I went, or who helped me, it adds another layer of danger to your situation." His words were meant to explain, but they only confused me more. What organization? What information could I possibly have that would matter after 8 years? Nathan stood, moving to the windows despite the obvious pain it caused him. "When I dropped out of Columbia, it wasn't voluntary. I'd witnessed something I shouldn't have seen, a murder committed by a high-ranking member of the Moretti crime family. They found out I'd been there, and they came after me. I ran, changed my identity, went underground. But I didn't stay hidden. I built my own organization from the ground up, taking territory from the Morettis bit by bit, year after year. Everything I've done since that night has been preparation for the war I knew would eventually come." "The Moretti family," I breathed. I'd heard the name before. Everyone in New York had. They were old-school organized crime, the kind that owned politicians and judges, that had their fingers in every corrupt pie from construction to waste management. "And you've been fighting them this whole time?" Nathan turned back to face me, and I saw the weight of years in his expression. "Fighting them, yes. But also becoming like them in ways I never intended. You build an empire in the shadows. You adopt shadow methods. I've done things I'm not proud of, Nicole. Things that would horrify the boy you knew in that study group." "Why are you telling me this?" I asked, though part of me already knew. "Because I need you to understand what you've gotten involved in. This isn't just about the Valdez cartel trying to kill me. It's about a decade-long war between criminal organizations with resources and ruthlessness you can't imagine. And now you're caught in the middle of it because you were brave enough and stupid enough to save my life. The anger that flared in me was hot and righteous. Don't you dare call me stupid for doing my job. I'm a paramedic. I save lives. That's what I do. That's who I am. I didn't know who you were when I dove into that river. And even if I had known, I would have done the same thing because that's what being human means. Not calculating odds or protecting yourself at all costs, but helping someone who needs it even when it's dangerous." My outburst seemed to surprise him, breaking through whatever careful control he usually maintained. "You're right," he said quietly. "I'm sorry. What you did was brave, not stupid. It's just, Bravery like yours doesn't survive long in my world. People who act without calculating the cost end up dead. I've lost too many good people who thought honor and courage were enough to keep them alive. I don't want to add you to that list. Then let me go, I challenged. Give me money, new identity, somewhere far away where neither the cartel nor your enemies can find me. You have the resources to make me disappear if you really want to protect me. Nathan's laugh was bitter. I can't. Even if I wanted to, which I don't, it's too late. The Valdez cartel has your face, your name. They have resources in every major city, contacts across the country. There's nowhere you could go that they wouldn't eventually find you. And if they found you without my protection, they'd use you to hurt me and then kill you. Your only chance of survival is staying here, under my security, until we resolve this situation. And how exactly do you resolve a war with a cartel? I demanded. How does this end, Nathan? He met my eyes, and I saw something in his expression that made my blood run cold. It ends with one side completely destroyed. There's no negotiation, no compromise. The Valdez cartel declared war when they tried to kill me on that bridge. Now I have to finish what they started, or everyone I care about becomes a target, including you. The weight of that statement hung between us, heavy with implications I didn't want to examine too closely. I stood, suddenly desperate to be anywhere but in this room with this man who'd somehow become both my savior and my captor. I need time to process this. All of it. Nathan nodded, not trying to stop me as I moved toward the door. Take all the time you need. But Nicole, one more thing. I paused, looking back at him. Thank you for saving my life, for not turning me in, for trusting me even when you had no reason to. Whatever happens next, I want you to know that I'll do everything in my power to keep you safe. I left without responding, climbing the stairs back to my borrowed room, my mind spinning with everything he'd told me. I'd saved a man who'd built an empire on violence and corruption, a man who was planning to wage war against one of the most dangerous criminal organizations in North America. And somehow, impossibly, I was caught in the middle of it all because I'd done the right thing, because I'd jumped into dark water to save a stranger, without knowing the true cost of that choice. Sleep was impossible that night. I lay in the enormous bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of the house settling around me. Footsteps in the hallway suggested guards making rounds, a reminder that this beautiful prison was still a prison no matter how comfortable the cage. At some point past midnight, I heard raised voices from somewhere below, Marcus's distinctive rasp and Nathan's calmer tones arguing about something I couldn't quite make out. The argument ended with a door slamming, and then silence returned, even more oppressive than before. When dawn finally came, painting the room in shades of gray and gold, I made a decision. I couldn't change what had happened, couldn't undo my choice to save Nathan or bring him to my apartment, but I could control how I responded to this new reality. I could be a victim, helpless and afraid, waiting for Nathan or the cartel to decide my fate. Or I could be active participant in my own survival, learning the rules of this new world I'd been thrust into, finding ways to protect myself beyond relying on the mercy of dangerous men. I showered and dressed with new purpose, choosing practical clothes that allowed freedom of movement. When Catherine knocked to offer breakfast, I asked instead to speak with Nathan. She studied me for a long moment, then nodded. He's in his study. I'll take you there. The study was on the first floor, a room lined with books, and dominated by a massive desk covered in papers and computer monitors showing security camera feeds from around the property. Nathan looked up as I entered, surprise and something else, hope, maybe, flickering across his features. I want to know everything, I said before he could speak. About your organization, about the Moretti family, about the Valdez Cartel and why they're trying to kill you. I want to understand this world you've brought me into. All of it. If I'm going to survive this, I need information, not protection. I need to be able to make my own choices based on real knowledge, not just trust that you'll keep me safe. Nathan leaned back in his chair, studying me with those dark eyes that had once belonged to an ambitious college student and now belonged to someone much more dangerous. "All right," he said finally. "I'll tell you everything, but understand that once you know, there's no going back to ignorance. The things I'm going to tell you will change how you see the world, how you see me. Are you sure you want that?" "I'm sure," I said, sitting down across from him, my hands folded in my lap to hide their trembling. "Tell me the truth, all of it." And so he did, his words painting a picture of a world that existed parallel to the normal one, hidden but always present, operating by rules I'd never imagined. As he talked, the morning sun climbed higher, flooding the study with light that somehow made his confession seem even darker by contrast. Nathan's explanation took hours, his voice steady as he laid out the architecture of his criminal empire with the same matter-of-fact tone someone might use to describe a legitimate business. He controlled shipping routes along the East Coast, specialized in moving high-value cargo that other organizations couldn't or wouldn't touch, technology mostly, cutting-edge equipment that companies wanted, transported without questions or paper trails. It sounded almost respectable the way he described it, until he mentioned the enforcement arm of his organization, the men like Marcus who ensured compliance through intimidation, and when necessary, violence. The Moretti family had controlled these routes for decades before Nathan came along. His takeover had been gradual, strategic, exploiting their weaknesses while building alliances with smaller organizations that chafed under Moretti rule. He'd offered better terms, more reliable service, and protection from the Moretti's increasingly erratic leadership. Within 5 years, he'd carved out enough territory to be considered a legitimate threat. Within 8, he'd become their primary rival, controlling nearly 40% of what they'd once monopolized. The Valdez cartel's interest was more recent and more dangerous. They were expanding north from Mexico, bringing with them a level of brutality that made even established crime families nervous. They didn't want to negotiate or share territory. They wanted complete control, and they'd shown a willingness to massacre anyone who stood in their way. The hit on Nathan had been their opening move in what he believed would be a prolonged campaign to either force his surrender or eliminate him entirely. "And where does that leave me?" I asked when he finally finished, my head spinning from information overload. "In all these strategies and territories and wars, what am I?" Nathan's expression was difficult to read. "Your leverage they can use against me. Proof that I have vulnerabilities beyond my organization. But you're also something else. Something I didn't expect." He paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. "You're a reminder that not everything in this world is corrupt, that there are still people who act out of genuine goodness rather than calculated self-interest." "That doesn't answer my question," I pressed. "What happens to me now? Do I stay here forever? Do I become part of your organization? Do I just wait until someone decides I'm more valuable dead than alive?" Before Nathan could respond, Marcus burst into the study without knocking, his face tight with urgency. "We have a situation. 3 vehicles just breached the outer perimeter. Valdez colors. They're demanding we turn over the paramedic or they start killing civilians in Queens." The blood drained from my face. "Civilians? What civilians?" Marcus pulled up footage on one of the monitors. It showed a residential street I recognized immediately as being near my old apartment building. 4 men in tactical gear stood in the middle of the road, assault rifles visible, while terrified residents peered from windows. One of the men held up a sign with a message written in bold letters. "Give us the girl or the neighborhood burns." "They wouldn't," I breathed, but even as I said it, I knew they would. Nathan had spent hours explaining exactly how ruthless the Valdez cartel could be. They'd murdered entire families to send messages, burned businesses with people inside, tortured informants in public spaces. Threatening my former neighbors was nothing to them, just another tactical move in a larger game. Nathan's jaw was set, his expression carved from stone. "How many hostiles total?" 12 that we can confirm, Marcus reported. "But there could be more in the surrounding buildings. They're smart enough to know we won't move against them with civilians in the crossfire. They're giving us 30 minutes to deliver Nicole to a neutral location, or they start executing people. 1 every 10 minutes until we comply." Nathan stood, his wounded shoulder clearly bothering him but his movements decisive. "Pull our entire security team. I want tactical assessment within 5 minutes and extraction options for the civilians. We're not letting the cartel murder innocent people." "You can't fight them directly," Marcus said. "Not without starting a war that will draw federal attention we can't afford. The Morettis are already circling, waiting for us to show weakness. If we engage the Valdez cartel in a populated area, we give the FBI exactly what they need to justify a full investigation into our operations." He was right. I could see it in Nathan's face even as he wanted to argue. A direct confrontation would destroy everything he'd built, expose his organization to exactly the kind of scrutiny that would bring it all crashing down. Which meant there was only one option that made any sense. "I'll go," I said quietly. Both men turned to look at me like they'd forgotten I was in the room. "I'll turn myself over to them. You can't fight them without massive consequences, and I can't let innocent people die because I happen to save the wrong person's life. I'll go. And whatever happens after that happens." Nathan crossed the distance between us in 3 quick strides, his hands gripping my shoulders. "Absolutely not. You don't understand what they'll do to you, Nicole. They won't just kill you quickly. They'll torture you for information about my organization, my security protocols, everything you've seen in the last 2 days. And when they've extracted everything they can, they'll make your death as public and brutal as possible to send a message." "Then what do you suggest?" I demanded, anger rising to cover my fear. "Let them murder my neighbors? Mrs. Chen who feeds the stray cats? Marcus in 2A who plays guitar too loud but always holds the door? That family with the twin toddlers who I see at the bodega? I can't live with their blood on my hands, Nathan. I won't." "We find another option," Nathan said firmly. "Marcus, contact our people in the NYPD. See if we can get a tactical team to that location under the guise of responding to an active threat. It needs to look organic, not connected to us." "That'll take time we don't have," Marcus pointed out. "And if the cartel suspects we're behind it, they'll scatter and regroup somewhere else with more hostages. We need a solution in the next." He checked his watch. 26 minutes. The study fell silent, except for the hum of electronics and the distant sound of security teams mobilizing outside. I could see Nathan's mind working, calculating odds and options, trying to find some tactical advantage in an impossible situation. But every path forward led to unacceptable consequences. Either civilian deaths, or my capture, or open warfare that would destroy his organization. "There is one other option," a new voice said from the doorway. We all turned to find Catherine standing there, her expression thoughtful. "The cartel wants a show of weakness from Nathan, proof that they can force his hand. What if we give them that, but on our terms?" Nathan frowned. "What are you suggesting?" Catherine moved into the room, her demeanor professional despite the urgency of the situation. "We send Nicole to the neutral location as requested, but we do it in a way that allows us to maintain tactical advantage. She goes wired, multiple tracking devices, with our security team positioned to intervene the moment she's in danger." "That's insane," Nathan said flatly. "You want me to use her as bait?" Catherine's gaze was steady. "I want you to give the cartel what they think they want while maintaining enough control to prevent the worst outcomes. Nicole goes in, provides the appearance of compliance, but we extract her before they can move her to a secondary location. It's risky, but it's better than the alternatives." She turned to me. Would you be willing to do this? To put yourself at risk to save those civilians? Every instinct I had was screaming that this was a terrible idea, that walking willingly into the cartel's hands was suicide no matter what precautions we took. But the alternative was watching innocent people die, knowing I could have prevented it. That wasn't something I could live with, regardless of the personal cost. "I'll do it," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "Tell me what I need to do." The next 20 minutes were a blur of preparation. Marcus fitted me with 3 separate tracking devices, one sewn into the hem of my jeans, another embedded in a necklace that looked innocuous, but contained GPS and an open microphone, and a third injected just under the skin of my upper arm, in a location the cartel was unlikely to search immediately. Catherine provided a crash course in how to behave during capture, keep my answers vague, avoid volunteering information, try to establish rapport with guards while watching for escape opportunities. Nathan was silent through most of it, his expression dark and closed off. When Marcus stepped away to coordinate with the security teams, Nathan finally spoke. "I don't like this plan. Too many variables we can't control, too many ways it goes wrong." His eyes met mine. "If something happens to you because of my choices, because I brought you into this world, I'll never forgive myself." "Then don't let anything happen to me," I said, with more confidence than I felt. "You said you'd protect me. This is your chance to prove it." Marcus returned with a tablet showing the tactical layout. "We're moving you to the neutral location in 10 minutes. It's a parking garage in Brooklyn, public enough that they can't risk too much attention, but isolated enough for a quick extraction. Our teams will be positioned on every level, with snipers covering the entrance and exit points. The moment we confirm they're moving you to a vehicle, we intervene." "And if they decide to kill me immediately instead of moving me?" I asked, needing to know the worst-case scenario. Marcus's expression didn't change. "Then our snipers take down everyone in the garage before they can pull a trigger. We'll have lethal authorization on all hostile targets the moment you're in danger." It wasn't the reassurance I'd hoped for, but it was better than nothing. The drive to Brooklyn felt surreal, watching the city pass by through tinted windows while knowing I was heading toward almost certain violence. Nathan insisted on coming despite Marcus's protests that his presence added unnecessary risk. He sat beside me in the back of the SUV, not touching me, but close enough that I could feel the tension radiating from him. When we were 5 minutes out, he finally broke the silence. "I need you to know something before you do this." His voice was low, meant only for me despite the other occupants of the vehicle. 8 years ago when you came to my dorm room and found me packing, found me scared and running, you were the only person who looked at me with concern instead of judgment. You asked if I needed help, if there was anything you could do. I told you to leave, to forget about me, because I didn't want to drag someone like you into my mess. His hand found mine, his grip warm and solid. "I'm doing the same thing now, dragging you into something you should have never been part of. And I'm sorry for that. More sorry than I can express." "You didn't drag me anywhere," I said firmly. "I made choices. I jumped into that river. I brought you to my apartment. I agreed to this plan. All of those were my decisions, Nathan. Stop trying to shoulder all the responsibility for what's happening. We're here together, and we'll get through it together." His smile was sad, tinged with something that looked like regret. "You always were braver than you had any right to be. It's one of the things I remembered about you during all those years. The way you'd defend positions in that study group even when everyone disagreed. The way you'd stand up for people who couldn't stand up for themselves. I admired that then. I admire it now." The SUV pulled into the parking garage, ascending to the 3rd level where the exchange was supposed to take place. Through the windows, I could see 2 vehicles already there, black SUVs with tinted windows and armed men standing beside them. 5 that I could count, all carrying automatic weapons with the casual familiarity of people who use them regularly. Marcus's voice came through the communications system. Eyes on 12 hostiles total. 6 on this level, 3 on the level above, 3 watching the street entrance. We're in position for extraction, just waiting for your signal. Nathan turned to me one last time. If anything feels wrong, if you sense they're not following the expected pattern, you say the code word. Marcus, what's the code word? Goldfish, Marcus replied. You say goldfish and we come in immediately. Protocols be damned. I nodded, committing it to memory even as I wondered what kind of situation would make me think of that particular word. The door opened and I stepped out, my legs unsteady beneath me as I walked toward the cartel operatives. They watched me approach, their weapons not quite pointed at me but ready to move in that direction at any sign of trouble. One of them stepped forward, a man in his 30s with a scar running down his left cheek and cold eyes that assessed me like I was a piece of meat. Nicole Parker, he said in accented English, the paramedic who thinks she's a hero. Our employer is very interested in meeting you. He'll be disappointed to learn you've been cooperating with Nathan Cross, but perhaps we can help you see the error of that choice. His hand shot out, gripping my arm with bruising force. Time to go, Preciosa. You're going to tell us everything about Cross's operation, and then we're going to send your body back to him in pieces. Behind me, I heard the SUV's engine rev and knew Nathan was barely restraining himself from intervening. But I also heard Marcus's voice in my earpiece, calm and professional. Hold position. Let them move her toward their vehicles. We need them grouped for optimal neutralization. The man with the scar pulled me toward one of the black SUVs, and I could see another operative opening the rear door. This was it, the moment where everything either went according to plan or fell apart catastrophically. I took a breath, preparing to climb into the vehicle that would either take me to my death or to freedom, when suddenly everything changed. Gunfire erupted from the level above, the distinctive crack of sniper rifles followed by the heavier automatic weapon fire. The man holding my arm jerked me around to use as a shield, his weapon coming up to point at Nathan's SUV. More gunfire, this time from behind us, and I realized with growing horror that this wasn't Nathan's security team. Someone else had joined the fight, a third party that neither side had anticipated. Bullets ricocheted off concrete pillars, sparking in the dim garage lighting. The man with the scar was shouting into a radio, his grip on my arm never loosening even as chaos erupted around us. His words were in rapid Spanish, but I caught enough to understand that they were under attack from multiple directions, that this was an ambush they hadn't expected. Nathan's voice came through my earpiece, urgent and commanding. Nicole, get down. Cover your head. We're coming for you. Before I could follow his instructions, an explosion rocked the garage, the concussive force throwing me to the ground. My ears were ringing, vision blurred, but I felt hands grabbing me, pulling me up. For a moment I thought it was Nathan's people, that the extraction was happening. Then I saw the face above me, saw the cruel smile of the man with the scar, and knew that whatever was happening, it was far worse than anyone had planned. The world was noise and smoke and violence. My ears rang from the explosion, my vision swimming as the man with the scar dragged me through the chaos toward a service exit I hadn't noticed before. Behind us, gunfire continued in sharp, controlled bursts, the sound echoing off concrete walls until it was impossible to tell how many shooters there were or which direction the danger was coming from. I tried to pull away, but his grip was iron, his fingers digging into my arm hard enough to leave bruises that would last for days if I survived this. We burst through the service door into a narrow stairwell, the sudden quiet almost more disorienting than the noise had been. I could still hear the firefight raging in the garage behind us, muffled now by the heavy door. The man with the scar was breathing hard, his face flushed with adrenaline and fury. He yanked me down the stairs, taking them 2 at a time while I stumbled to keep up. My mind was racing, trying to calculate odds, trying to remember the tactical training Catherine had given me, but everything was happening too fast. We emerged into an alley behind the parking garage where a nondescript van was waiting, engine running, rear doors already open. Another operative grabbed my other arm, and together they lifted me bodily into the van, throwing me onto the metal floor with enough force to knock the breath from my lungs. The doors slammed shut, and we were moving before I could even sit up, the van accelerating hard enough that I slid backward into someone's legs. "Secure her," a voice commanded in Spanish, and hands grabbed me again, rougher this time. Someone zip-tied my wrists behind my back, the plastic cutting into my skin. A hood was pulled over my head, plunging me into darkness that smelled of old sweat and something chemical I couldn't identify. I forced myself to breathe slowly, fighting the panic that threatened to overwhelm me. The tracking devices, I reminded myself. Nathan's people could still find me through the tracking devices Marcus had planted, unless they'd been destroyed in the explosion, unless the cartel knew to look for them, unless a dozen other things had gone wrong with the plan. The van made several sharp turns, the motion throwing me against the metal walls hard enough to bruise. I lost track of time, lost track of direction, could only focus on breathing and not letting the terror completely consume me. Finally, after what might have been 20 minutes or might have been an hour, the van stopped. The rear doors opened and hands dragged me out into cold air that tasted of salt and diesel fuel. We were near the water, I realized. The docks, maybe, or one of the industrial areas along the waterfront. They walked me across uneven pavement, my stumbling steps guided by rough hands on my arms. I heard a metal door scrape open. Then I was being pushed down more stairs, these ones steeper and narrower than before. The temperature dropped significantly, the air growing damp and stale. A basement or underground space of some kind. When they finally removed the hood, I found myself in exactly the kind of place I'd feared. A concrete room with a single bare bulb hanging from the ceiling. No windows, one door, and absolutely nothing else except a metal chair bolted to the floor. The man with the scar stood before me, his cold smile back in place now that we were away from the chaos of the parking garage. "Sit," he commanded, gesturing to the chair. When I didn't move fast enough, he shoved me hard enough that I fell into it, my bound wrists making it impossible to catch myself properly. Another operative secured my ankles to the chair legs with more zip ties, while a third checked me for weapons or electronics. His hands were impersonal, but thorough, patting down every inch of my body. He found the necklace first, ripping it from my throat with enough force to break the chain. "Tracking device," he announced, holding it up for his companions to see. They laughed, a sound without humor. The second operative continued his search, finding the GPS unit sewn into my jeans after cutting away most of the fabric. 2 down, 1 to go if Marcus had done his job properly. But when they finished their search without finding the subdermal tracker in my arm, I allowed myself a tiny spark of hope. They'd missed one. Nathan's people could still find me. The man with the scar pulled up another chair, sitting down directly in front of me close enough that our knees almost touched. His smile widened, showing teeth that were too white, too perfect. "Welcome to your new home, Nicole Parker. I hope you'll forgive the accommodations, but we had to move quickly after your boyfriend's security team complicated our original plans." He leaned forward, his breath smelling of coffee and cigarettes. "Now, let's talk about Nathan Cross. You're going to tell me everything you know about his operation. Security protocols, business associates, financial holdings, where he keeps his money, who he trusts. Everything." "I don't know anything," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "I'm a paramedic. I pulled him from a river 2 days ago. That's the extent of our relationship." The slap came fast, snapping my head to the side hard enough that I tasted blood. My cheek burned, my vision swimming with tears I refused to let fall. The man with the scar's expression never changed, his smile remaining fixed in place like it had been carved there. "Don't lie to me," he said pleasantly. "We've been watching Cross's compound since yesterday. We know you've been staying there. Know you've had private meetings with him. Know that he cares enough about you to risk his entire security team trying to get you back. People who mean nothing don't get that kind of protection. He cares about not looking weak, I countered, spitting blood onto the concrete floor. I'm a civilian who saved his life. If he let you take me without a fight, it would make him look vulnerable to his enemies. That doesn't mean I know anything useful about his business. Another slap, this one harder, from the opposite direction. My head rang like a bell, and I felt something warm trickle down from my nose. The man with the scar stood, circling behind me where I couldn't see him. His voice came from over my shoulder, conversational and terrifying in its casualness. Let me explain something about how this works, Nicole. We're going to ask you questions, and you're going to answer them. If we believe you're telling the truth, the questioning stays relatively civilized. If we think you're lying, or if we simply get bored, things become much less pleasant. His hand appeared in my peripheral vision, holding a knife that caught the light from the bare bulb. We've had a lot of practice at this. We know exactly how much pain the human body can endure before it shuts down. And we're very good at keeping people conscious through experiences they would normally pass out from. The hours that followed were the worst of my life. They asked questions about Nathan's organization, about his security measures, about people I'd never heard of, and places I'd never been. When I couldn't answer, or when they didn't believe my responses, they hurt me. Not severely at first, just enough to make their point. Cigarette burns on my arms. Pressure points that sent electric pain through my nervous system. The knife cutting shallow lines across my skin that burned like fire, but didn't bleed enough to weaken me. They were professionals at this, skilled at inflicting maximum pain with minimum damage, keeping me conscious and aware for what felt like days, but was probably only hours. I told them everything I knew, which wasn't much. Nathan had been careful about what information he shared with me, either because he was protecting his operation or protecting me from having knowledge that would make me more valuable to his enemies. I described his compound to the best of my ability, named the few people I'd met, admitted that he'd told me about his conflict with the Moretti family and the Valdez cartel. But I couldn't give them what they really wanted, the operational details that would let them destroy Nathan's organization from within. Eventually, the man with the scar seemed to accept that I genuinely didn't have the information they needed. He stood back, wiping blood from the knife on a rag before sheathing it. "Tomorrow we'll try something different," he said. "We'll show Nathan Cross exactly what happens to people under his protection. We'll send him pieces of you, starting with fingers and working up to more important parts. Maybe that will motivate him to negotiate, to give us what we want in exchange for whatever's left of you." He smiled that terrible smile. "Get some rest, Preciosa. You'll need your strength for what comes next." They left me alone in the room, still bound to the chair, my body a constellation of pain. I couldn't tell if it was day or night, couldn't hear anything beyond the occasional drip of water somewhere in the darkness beyond the single bulb's reach. I let my head fall forward, exhaustion and pain dragging me toward unconsciousness. When I heard it, a faint electronic chirp that sounded almost like a bird. My eyes snapped open, hope surging through me despite everything. The tracking device. It was still active, still transmitting. Nathan's people were out there somewhere, and they knew where I was. Time lost meaning in that room. I drifted in and out of consciousness, my body's defense mechanism against pain and stress. I dreamed of diving into cold water, of drowning and being saved, of hands pulling me to safety that might have been Nathan's, or might have been death itself. When I finally heard sounds outside the door, metal scraping against metal, I couldn't tell if it was real or hallucination. The door burst open and men flooded into the room, but they weren't wearing cartel colors. They were dressed in black tactical gear, moving with military precision, and the first face I saw clearly was Marcus. He crossed to me in 3 quick strides, his knife already out to cut the zip ties binding me to the chair. Behind him, I heard gunfire, shouts in Spanish and English the sounds of a violent confrontation happening somewhere in the building above us. "Nathan's right behind me," Marcus said, his voice tight with barely controlled fury. "Can you walk?" I tried to stand and my legs gave out, the hours in the chair and the trauma of torture leaving me unable to support my own weight. Marcus caught me easily, lifting me in his arms like I weighed nothing. More operatives poured into the room, securing it, checking for threats. Then Nathan was there, his face a mask of cold rage when he saw my condition. His hands were gentle as they touched my face, his eyes cataloging every injury, every mark the cartel had left on me. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice breaking on the words. "I'm so sorry, Nicole. This should never have happened. You're safe now. I promise you're safe." I wanted to tell him it wasn't his fault, wanted to reassure him somehow, but exhaustion claimed me before I could form the words. I felt him lift me from Marcus's arms, felt the solid warmth of his chest as he carried me out of that terrible room, upstairs that seemed to go on forever, into fresh air that tasted like freedom and salt water and blood. The extraction was chaos. Nathan's security team had assaulted the warehouse where I'd been held, engaging the cartel operatives in a firefight that lit up the night with muzzle flashes and the sound of automatic weapons. I was aware of it all in fragments, consciousness coming and going like a flickering light. Nathan carried me to a waiting vehicle, laying me carefully in the back seat, his hands never leaving me, even as Marcus drove with controlled urgency through streets that blurred past the windows. "We're taking you to a private medical facility." Nathan's voice came from very far away. "Real doctors, people I trust. They'll take care of you, make sure nothing's permanently damaged." His hand smoothed hair back from my face, the gesture tender in a way that seemed impossible from a man who'd built an empire on violence. "I should have protected you better. Should have known the cartel would have backup plans, contingencies we didn't account for. This is on me. All of it." "Stop," I managed to whisper, my voice raw from screaming during the interrogation. "My choice. I chose this." Nathan's laugh was bitter. "You chose to save a drowning man. Everything after that was my choices, my world, my consequences. You just got caught in the blast radius." His thumb traced my cheekbone, careful of the bruises already forming. "But I swear to you, Nicole, on everything I have and everything I am, the people who did this to you will pay. The Valdez cartel has made this personal, and I'm going to show them exactly what that means." The medical facility was hidden in plain sight, a private clinic in Manhattan that appeared to serve wealthy clients seeking cosmetic procedures, but actually functioned as an off-the-books hospital for people in Nathan's world. The doctors were real, their credentials legitimate, but they'd long ago decided that the money and protection Nathan offered was worth compromising their oaths. They treated my injuries with professional efficiency, cleaning wounds, setting a broken finger I hadn't realized was broken, administering antibiotics and pain medication that finally brought blessed relief from the constant agony. I drifted in and out of consciousness over the next hours or days, time meaningless in the quiet recovery room where machines beeped softly, and Nathan's presence was a constant. He never left, even when the doctors tried to insist he needed rest too. I'd wake to find him sitting beside my bed, his hand holding mine, his face drawn with exhaustion and guilt. Once I woke to find him asleep in the chair beside me, his head on the edge of my bed, and I felt a surge of emotion I couldn't quite name looking at him like that. Vulnerable and human, rather than the dangerous crime boss who commanded armies of men. When I finally woke fully, the pain manageable and my mind clear, I found Nathan awake and watching me. The relief in his expression was profound, transforming his features into something almost soft. "You're back," he said simply. "I was worried the pain medication was too strong, that you'd sleep for days. How do you feel?" "Like I got tortured by a drug cartel," I said, my attempted humor falling flat, Nathan's expression tightened. The doctor says you'll recover fully. No permanent damage beyond some scarring. But Nicole, the psychological trauma of what you went through, that's going to take time. I've arranged for a therapist, someone who specializes in PTSD, someone I trust to be discreet. I don't need a therapist, I said, even though I knew it was a lie. I'd already had nightmares during my few hours of real sleep, dreams of that concrete room, and the man with the scar and pain that went on forever. But admitting I needed help felt like admitting weakness, and I'd been weak enough for one lifetime. Nathan didn't argue, just nodded like he understood. She'll be available when you're ready. No pressure. He paused, seeming to wrestle with something. We found the warehouse because of the tracking device in your arm. It saved your life. Gave us your location before they could move you somewhere we'd never find you. And the cartel operatives? I asked. Not sure I wanted to know. The ones who took me. Who... I couldn't finish the sentence. Nathan's expression went cold, hard in a way that reminded me exactly who and what he was. Dead. All of them. We left no survivors, sent a message that anyone who touches someone under my protection ends up in the ground. The Valdez cartel will understand what that means. They'll retaliate. But they'll also know there are lines they can't cross without consequences. His words should have horrified me. Should have reminded me that I was involved with someone who casually discussed mass murder as a tactical decision. But all I felt was a fierce, savage satisfaction that the people who'd hurt me were gone, that they'd never torture anyone else the way they'd tortured me. Maybe that made me a monster too, or maybe it just made me human, capable of embracing darkness when the alternative was pretending violence hadn't touched me. Over the next few days, as my body healed and I regained strength, I began to understand exactly how extensive Nathan's organization really was. People came to visit, offering respect and loyalty that went far beyond simple employment. There was Elena, a woman in her 40s who ran Nathan's financial operations and spoke about him with genuine affection. There was James, younger than me, who'd apparently been one of Nathan's first recruits and now handled West Coast operations. There was Maria, who managed security for Nathan's legitimate business fronts and brought me books and flowers with a shy smile. They treated me with a deference I didn't understand until Catherine explained. "You saved his life," she said simply. "In Nathan's world, that creates a debt that can never be fully repaid. But beyond that, he's told us you're important to him personally. That makes you family, and we protect family." The concept of family in this context was complicated, tangled up with loyalty and obligation and the kind of bonds forged in violence. But I couldn't deny it felt good to be part of something, to have people who cared whether I lived or died. Even if that care came with strings attached, I didn't fully understand yet. Nathan brought me back to his compound when the doctors cleared me for discharge. My room was exactly as I'd left it, except now, there were flowers on every surface, and someone had stocked the closet with enough clothes to last me months. He hovered awkwardly in the doorway while I took it all in, his hands in his pockets like he didn't know what to do with them. "If you need anything at all, just ask Catherine or Marcus or me. You're safe here, Nicole. I promise you're safe." I turned to face him fully, seeing him clearly for maybe the first time since this had all started. He wasn't just the scared boy from my study group anymore, and he wasn't just the dangerous criminal who'd dragged me into his world. He was something more complex, someone capable of profound violence and unexpected tenderness, someone who'd built an empire from nothing and maintained it through will and strategy and ruthlessness, someone who looked at me like I was precious, valuable beyond any tactical consideration. "Thank you," I said quietly, "for saving me, for not giving up even when you probably should have." Nathan crossed the room, his movements careful like he was approaching something fragile. "I'll never give up on you," he said. "Not when the cartel had you. Not if 100 organizations come after you. You're under my protection now, and that means something. It means everything. His hand cupped my cheek, gentle despite the calluses from violence. You matter to me, Nicole. More than I can properly explain. I should have pulled away, should have maintained distance from a man whose world was soaked in blood and danger. But I didn't. Instead, I leaned into his touch, accepting the comfort he offered, accepting that whatever this was between us, it had become something real, something that transcended the circumstances that had brought us together. We stood like that for a long moment, the afternoon light streaming through the windows, suspended in a peace that I knew couldn't last, but wanted to hold on to for as long as possible. Recovery was slower than I wanted, but faster than the doctors expected. My body healed with the resilience of someone who'd spent years working physically demanding shifts, pushing through exhaustion and minor injuries because paramedics didn't have the luxury of taking time off. The cigarette burns faded to small circular scars. The cuts closed and became thin white lines. The bruises cycled through their rainbow of colors before finally disappearing. But the internal healing, the psychological wounds that Dr. Sarah Chen tried to help me process during our twice-weekly sessions, those proved more stubborn. I had nightmares most nights, waking in a cold sweat with the phantom sensation of zip ties cutting into my wrists, the smell of that concrete room in my nostrils. Sometimes I'd wake screaming, and Nathan would be there, having heard me from his room down the hall. He never tried to touch me during those episodes, just sat in the chair by the window and talked in a low, steady voice about nothing important until my breathing returned to normal and the terror receded enough for me to sleep again. 3 weeks after the warehouse rescue, I was finally cleared to move around the compound without restriction. The physical therapist Nathan had hired pronounced my mobility fully restored, and Dr. Chen cautiously agreed that I was processing the trauma in healthy ways. I still flinched at unexpected sounds and couldn't handle being in small enclosed spaces, but I was functional, present, returning to something that resembled the person I'd been before diving into that river. It was a Tuesday morning when everything changed again. I was in the kitchen helping Catherine prepare lunch, enjoying the mundane domesticity of chopping vegetables and discussing whether the soup needed more herbs, when Marcus appeared in the doorway. His expression was grim, more troubled than I'd seen since the day of my rescue. "Boss needs to see you both immediately," he said. "We have a situation." The study had been transformed into a command center. Multiple monitors showed security footage from various locations, and 6 of Nathan's senior people were gathered around the desk, their faces uniformly tense. Nathan looked up as we entered, and I saw exhaustion and anger warring in his expression. "The Valdez Cartel made their next move," he said without preamble. "They hit 3 of our distribution centers simultaneously this morning, killed everyone on site, burned the facilities to the ground, and left a message." He pulled up an image on the largest monitor, and my stomach dropped. It was a photograph clearly taken at one of the burned sites, showing a wall spray-painted with words in Spanish and English both. "Return what you stole, or watch your empire burn. The girl dies last, so she can watch." The threat was clear, unambiguous, and terrifying in its specificity. "What did you steal from them?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Nathan's jaw tightened. 6 months ago, one of their shipping containers was intercepted by customs at Newark. The cargo was supposed to be automotive parts, but it actually contained $50 million in bearer bonds they were moving for a Mexican official. Customs seized it, and the cartel blamed us, thought we'd tipped off the authorities to damage them. We didn't, but they've convinced themselves we're responsible. The bearer bonds disappeared into the federal evidence system, and the cartel wants them back, or equivalent compensation. "Can you pay them?" Catherine asked pragmatically. $50 million to end this war might be cheaper than continuing to fight. Nathan shook his head. "It's not about the money anymore. They made this personal when they tortured Nicole. If I pay them now, it looks like weakness. like they can hurt people I care about and force my compliance. Every organization I've ever crossed would see that as an invitation to do the same. We'd be fighting wars on a dozen fronts within weeks. So what's the alternative? I asked, though I already knew the answer. The alternative is we eliminate the Valdez Cartel's leadership in New York, cut off the head of their operation here, and make it too expensive for them to continue their expansion north. It's risky, requires coordination with some of our more questionable allies, and will almost certainly draw federal attention. But it's the only move that maintains our position while removing the immediate threat. He looked at me directly. They've made it clear you're a target, Nicole. Not just leverage, but someone they intend to kill slowly and publicly. I won't let that happen. The next 72 hours were some of the most intense I'd ever experienced. Nathan's compound became a fortress. Security doubled and then tripled, with armed patrols visible at all hours. I wasn't allowed to leave the main house, and even moving between rooms required coordination with whatever guard was assigned to shadow me. Nathan disappeared into his study with his senior leadership, emerging only for brief meals that he barely touched, his mind clearly occupied with strategy and contingencies. On the third night, he came to my room long after midnight. I was awake, had been for hours, unable to sleep knowing something significant was being planned. He knocked softly, and I called for him to enter, found him standing in the doorway backlit by the hallway lights. "Can't sleep either?" he asked, his voice rough with exhaustion. I shook my head, pulling the blankets around myself. "Come in. Close the door. You look like you need to talk to someone who isn't part of your organization." Nathan closed the door and crossed to the window seat where I'd been sitting, staring out at the dark forest. He sat beside me, careful to leave space between us, his hands clasped loosely in his lap. "Tomorrow night we move against the Valdez Cartel," he said quietly. "Simultaneous strikes on their leadership, their financial operations, their weapons caches. It's coordinated with the Moretti family, strange as that sounds. Turns out we have a common interest in keeping the cartel from gaining too much power in New York." "You're working with the people you've been fighting for 8 years?" I asked, surprised. Nathan's smile was without humor. Enemy of my enemy and all that. "The Morettis understand that if the Valdez Cartel succeeds in destroying my organization, they'll come for the Morettis next. Better to unite temporarily against an outside threat than let them pick us off individually. It won't last, this alliance, but it doesn't need to. Just long enough to send the cartel back to Mexico and make sure they understand that New York is closed to them. And after tomorrow, what happens to us?" The question hung between us, heavy with implications. Nathan turned to look at me, and I saw vulnerability in his expression, a crack in the armor he usually maintained so carefully. "That depends on you. If you want to leave after this is over, if you want me to set you up somewhere far away with a new identity and enough money to start fresh, I'll do it. No questions, no obligations. You've been through hell because of me, and you deserve a chance at a normal life if that's what you want." "But," I prompted, hearing the unspoken word, "but if you choose to stay?" His voice was soft, uncertain in a way I'd never heard from him before. "If you choose to be part of this life, part of my life, then I need you to understand what that means. It means danger will always be present. It means your morals will be constantly tested by the compromises necessary to survive in this world. It means you'll be a target for my enemies and complicit in things that would have horrified the person you were a month ago. I already am that person," I said quietly. "The person I was before dove into a river and changed everything. I'm not that innocent anymore, Nathan. I can't be. Not after what I've seen, what I've experienced. The cartel tortured me, and I felt satisfaction when you told me you'd killed them all. I watch your organization operate, and I don't feel the moral outrage I should. Maybe that makes me broken, or maybe it just makes me adaptable. Either way, I can't go back to who I was." Nathan's hand found mine in the darkness, his fingers interlacing with mine. "You're not broken. You're resilient, which is different. But Nicole, I need you to be sure. If you stay, If we do this together, there's no easy way out later. People will know you're important to me. Will see you as part of my organization. That makes you valuable and vulnerable in equal measure. His thumb traced circles on the back of my hand. I care about you too much to let you make this decision without understanding the full weight of it. I care about you too, I admitted, the words feeling both terrifying and liberating. I don't know when it happened, somewhere between you begging me not to call police and you carrying me out of that warehouse. Maybe it started even earlier, back in that study group when I had a crush on a boy who seemed destined for something bigger. I turned to face him fully. I'm not staying because I'm trapped or because I don't have options. I'm staying because when I imagine my life without you in it, without this strange family you've built, it feels empty. Wrong somehow. Nathan closed the distance between us, his hand cupping my face with infinite gentleness. His eyes searched mine, looking for doubt or hesitation. Whatever he saw there must have satisfied him because he leaned in slowly, giving me every opportunity to pull away, to change my mind. I didn't. Our lips met in a kiss that was soft and careful, mindful of my still healing injuries, but full of all the emotion we'd been dancing around for weeks. When we finally separated, his forehead rested against mine, our breathing synchronized. "Stay with me tonight," he said, not a command, but a request. "I don't want to be alone, and I don't think you do either. Not before tomorrow, not knowing what might happen." I nodded, and we moved to the bed together, lying fully clothed on top of the covers, his arms around me and my head on his chest. His heartbeat was steady beneath my ear, a rhythm that gradually lulled me toward the first peaceful sleep I'd had since the warehouse. Tomorrow would bring violence and danger, and possibly the end of everything. But tonight, in this moment, I was safe. The next day passed in tense preparation. Nathan's people moved with quiet efficiency, checking weapons and communications equipment, reviewing tactical plans that had been refined to the smallest detail. I stayed out of the way mostly, understanding that I had no role to play in what was coming, but unable to shake the nervous energy that made sitting still impossible. Catherine found me in the library around noon, her expression more open than usual. "He's going personally," she said without preamble. Marcus tried to talk him out of it, argued that the head of the organization should stay back and let others handle the tactical work. But Nathan insisted. He wants to look the cartel leadership in the eye, wants them to know exactly who's destroying them and why. She sat beside me on the couch, her hands folded in her lap. "He's doing this for you, you know. The attacks on the distribution centers were bad for business, but they weren't existential threats. He could have negotiated, found some middle ground, but they hurt you, and that made it personal for him." "I don't want him to die for me," I said, voicing the fear that had been growing all day. Catherine's smile was sad. "Then you'd better make sure he has something worth living for when he comes back. Men like Nathan, they get lost in the violence sometimes. They forget there's anything beyond the war, beyond the constant fight for survival and dominance. You remind him that there's more. Don't let him forget that, no matter what happens tonight." The strike teams left at dusk, 6 vehicles full of armed men heading to different locations across the city. Nathan came to find me before he left, dressed in black tactical gear that made him look like a different person, harder and more dangerous than the man who'd held me while I slept. "I wanted to say goodbye," he said, then shook his head. "No, that's not right. I wanted to see you before I left. Wanted to remember why I'm doing this." "Come back safe," I said, my hands gripping his vest like I could anchor him to life through sheer will. "Please, Nathan, come back to me." He kissed me once, hard and quick, then pulled away. "I'll come back," he promised. "I have something worth living for now." Then he was gone, Marcus at his side, leaving me standing in the foyer with Catherine's hand on my shoulder and terror churning in my stomach. The waiting was torture. Hours passed with no word, no updates, just silence and my imagination conjuring increasingly horrible scenarios. Catherine tried to distract me with mundane conversation, with offers of food and drink I couldn't stomach. Around midnight, the house phone rang, a landline I'd never heard used before. Catherine answered it, listened for a long moment, then hung up without speaking. The first strike was successful, she reported. Cartel leadership eliminated, no casualties on our side. But, I prompted, hearing what she wasn't saying. But Nathan's team hasn't reported in yet. They were hitting the cartel's main operations center, the most heavily defended target. We should have heard from them by now. The words hit me like a physical blow, fear crystallizing into something sharp and painful in my chest. Catherine's phone rang next, and I watched her face go pale as she listened. "What?" I demanded when she hung up. "What happened?" There was resistance, more than they expected. "Nathan's been shot. Marcus is bringing him home now, but Nicole," his voice, she swallowed hard. "He said to prepare for the worst." The next hour was a blur. Dr. Chen arrived with medical equipment, transforming one of the first-floor rooms into an emergency surgery suite. More of Nathan's people appeared, grim-faced and silent, gathering in the hallways like mourners at a wake. When the SUV finally pulled up, I ran outside despite Catherine's attempt to hold me back. Marcus emerged first, his face splattered with blood, his expression haunted. "He's alive," Marcus said before I could ask. "But it's bad, Nicole." He took 2 rounds to the chest. The vest stopped one, but the other found a gap. "He's lost a lot of blood. They brought Nathan in on a stretcher, and I barely recognized him beneath the blood and the pallor of shock." His eyes found mine as they carried him past, and he tried to smile, tried to say something, but Dr. Chen was already barking orders, her professional demeanor firmly in place as she began assessment and treatment. I tried to follow into the makeshift surgery suite, but Marcus held me back. "Let her work," he said gently. "You can't help him by being in there. You help by staying strong, by being here when he wakes up." The surgery took 4 hours. I counted every minute, paced the hallway until my legs ached, alternated between prayer to a God I wasn't sure I believed in and bargaining with the universe for Nathan's survival. Finally, Dr. Chen emerged, still in blood-covered scrubs, exhaustion etched into every line of her face. "He's stable," she announced, and I felt my knees go weak with relief. The bullet missed his heart by centimeters, but nicked his lung and caused significant internal bleeding. "I've repaired what I can, but the next 24 hours are critical. If he develops complications, infection, or hemorrhage, I might not be able to save him here. He'd need a real hospital." "Can I see him?" I asked. Dr. Chen nodded. "He's unconscious from the anesthesia, but yes. Just be prepared. He looks worse than he is." She wasn't lying. Nathan was nearly as pale as the sheets beneath him, tubes and wires connecting him to machines that beeped rhythmically. His chest was heavily bandaged, and I could see the strain of each breath he took. I pulled a chair close to the bed and took his hand, careful of the IV line taped to the back of it. "You promised you'd come back," I said softly, not caring if he could hear me or not. "You promised, and I'm holding you to that. I didn't survive torture and danger and falling in love with a crime boss just to lose you now. You don't get to die, Nathan Cross. You don't get to leave me alone in this world you dragged me into." My voice broke on the last words, tears finally spilling over. I stayed there through the night, holding his hand, talking to him about nothing and everything, willing him to keep breathing, to keep fighting, to come back to me. Dawn was breaking when his eyes finally fluttered open. They were unfocused at first, clouded with pain and medication. But they found me, and something like peace crossed his features. "Nicole?" His voice was barely a whisper, rough and pained. "You're here." "Where else would I be?" I said, squeezing his hand gently. "You scared me, Nathan." When Marcus said you'd been shot, I thought I couldn't finish the sentence. Nathan's thumb moved weakly against my hand. "Sorry. Wasn't planning on getting shot. The cartel had reinforcements we didn't know about. But we got them, Nicole. Their leadership is gone, their operations in New York dismantled. You're safe now. They can't hurt you anymore." "I don't care about safe," I said fiercely. "I care about you. About us. Don't you ever risk your life like that again, without thinking about who you'd be leaving behind." Nathan's smile was tired, but genuine. "So, you're staying? Even after seeing what this life really costs, what it demands, you're choosing to stay?" I leaned forward carefully, mindful of his injuries, and kissed his forehead. "I'm staying. For better or worse, in violence and in peace, I'm staying. I love you, Nathan. I think I have since that study group 8 years ago. And I know I do now. Whatever comes next, we face it together." His hand tightened on mine, his eyes bright with emotion that had nothing to do with pain. "I love you too," he said. "I have for 8 years, even when I didn't know where you were, even when I thought I'd never see you again. You were always the good thing I remembered, the one pure memory from before everything went dark. And now you're here, and you're choosing this, choosing me." His voice cracked slightly. "I don't deserve you, Nicole Parker." "Probably not," I agreed with a watery laugh. "But you've got me anyway. Now stop talking and rest." "Doctor's orders. Dr. Chen says if you behave yourself and heal properly, you'll be back to running your criminal empire in a few weeks." Nathan's eyes were already drifting closed, exhaustion and medication pulling him under. "Stay," he murmured. "Stay with me. Always," I promised. "I'm not going anywhere." In the weeks that followed, as Nathan healed and the full extent of the damage to the Valdez cartel's New York operations became clear, a new normal established itself. The cartel retreated, their expansion plans in tatters, their leadership decimated. The Morettis and Nathan's organization returned to their careful dance of rival powers, but with new respect born of shared combat. And I found my place in Nathan's world, not as a victim or an outsider, but as someone who belonged, who'd been tested by fire and chosen to stay. I never went back to being a paramedic. Couldn't imagine returning to that life after everything I'd experienced. Instead, I found myself drawn into the legitimate side of Nathan's business operations, using my medical knowledge to help establish a network of off-the-books clinics that served not just his organization but the broader community. People who couldn't afford healthcare, who couldn't risk going to hospitals for various reasons. They found their way to our doors, and we helped them. It was a strange kind of redemption, using skills meant for saving lives in service of an organization built on violence. 6 months after that terrible night when Nathan was shot, he asked me to marry him. Not with a dramatic proposal or an expensive ring, but quietly, in the garden where we'd had our first real conversation. We'd both survived things that should have killed us, both chosen each other despite having every reason to walk away. The wedding was small, just his closest people, and the strange family we'd built from loyalty and necessity and love. Catherine cried, and Marcus gave a toast about finding light in dark places that left half the guests in tears. We never had a conventional life, never would. There were still threats, still enemies who saw me as a way to hurt Nathan and saw him as an obstacle to their ambitions. But we faced them together, two people who'd jumped into dark water and found each other in the depths. Sometimes I thought about the Nicole Parker who'd been working a double shift that October evening, the woman who'd dove into a river without hesitation to save a stranger. She couldn't have imagined where that choice would lead, the pain and danger and unexpected love waiting on the other side of that decision. But standing in Nathan's arms on our wedding day, surrounded by people who would kill and die for us both, I knew I wouldn't change anything. Every scar, every nightmare, every moment of terror had led here, to a life stranger and more dangerous than I'd ever planned, but also fuller, richer, more real than anything I'd had before. I'd saved Nathan's life that night on the bridge, pulled him from water that should have claimed him. But in the end, he'd saved me too, pulled me from a life of quiet desperation into something extraordinary. We'd found each other twice, once in a college study group and once in a river cold enough to kill. And this time, nothing would pull us apart. Not cartels, not rivals, not the violence that surrounded us on all sides. We'd survived the worst the world could throw at us, and we'd emerged on the other side together, bound by choices made in darkness that had somehow led us to light.